in 3 minutes. A single phone call would cost a homeowners association $2 million. But this isn't just about money. This is about power, greed, and how one grandfather's love for fishing exposed the biggest HOA scandal in county history. My name is Frank Morrison, and what I am about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about property rights. I never thought a fishing rod would be the weapon that brought down an empire. But then again, I never expected to be at war with my own neighbors either. My name is Frank Morrison, and for 37 years, I've called Willow Creek Estates home. When my late wife Margaret and I first moved here in 1987, this place was different. It was a community where neighbors actually knew each other's names, where kids rode bikes freely down the tree-lined streets, and where the small pond at the center of our development was a gathering place for families. That pond, Cedar Lake, as we called it, became my sanctuary after Margaret passed 2 years ago. Every morning at sunrise, you'd find me there with my tackle box and my father's old fishing rod, casting lines for bluegill and bass. It wasn't about the fish, really. It was about the peace, the memories of teaching my grandkids to bait hooks, and the gentle rhythm that kept me sane during the darkest period of my life. But peace has a way of attracting predators. Enter Karen Whitfield, though she preferred Ms. Whitfield, HOA president, a woman who moved to Willow Creek 3 years ago with the apparent mission of turning our quiet neighborhood into her personal kingdom. Karen didn't just join the homeowners association, she conquered it. Within 18 months, she'd orchestrated a complete board takeover, implementing rules so strict they'd make a prison warden proud. No basketball hoops visible from the street, no garden gnomes, no cars parked in driveways overnight, and absolutely, positively, no fishing in Cedar Lake without a recreational permit that cost $500 per year, a fee that mysteriously coincided with Karen's presidency. I refused to pay it. This was my home, my community, and I'd been fishing that pond since before Karen knew our zip code existed. Besides, something felt wrong about the whole permit system. In all my years here, we'd never needed permits for the lake. It was part of the common area, maintained by our HOA dues that we all faithfully paid. That's when Karen escalated. It started with passive-aggressive notes slipped under my door. Dear Mr. Morrison, your continued violation of HOA regulations regarding recreational lake usage has been noted. Then came the certified letters, each one more threatening than the last. The fines started at $50, then $100, then $500 per violation. I tried reasoning with her. I attended HOA meetings, presented the original development plans showing the lake as a community amenity, even brought photos from decades of neighborhood barbecues and fishing tournaments held at Cedar Lake. Karen dismissed it all with a wave of her manicured hand. Rules are rules, Mr. Morrison, she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension. If you don't like them, perhaps Willow Creek isn't the right community for you anymore. That last comment hit like a slap. This woman, who'd lived here less time than I'd owned some of my fishing equipment, was suggesting I leave the home where I'd raised my children and mourn my wife. But I kept fishing. Every morning, same time, same spot. Then came the morning that changed everything. I was enjoying a particularly beautiful sunrise, watching an osprey dive for fish in the distance, when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. Turning, I saw Karen marching toward me with purpose, her phone already pressed to her ear. Yes, officer, I need to report trespassing on private property, she was saying, her eyes locked on mine with unmistakable triumph. There is an elderly man here who's been repeatedly warned about unauthorized access to our private lake. He's being aggressive and refusing to leave. Aggressive. I was sitting in a folding chair with a fishing rod. Ma'am, I'm not trespassing, I called out, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. This is common area property. I live here. Karen covered her phone's mouthpiece. Not anymore, Frank. The HOA voted last month. Cedar Lake is now private property. Accessible only to permitted users. You're trespassing. My blood ran cold. What vote? There was no community notice. No emergency board session. She interrupted. That shark smile spreading across her face. Perfectly legal. Now you can either leave voluntarily or explain yourself to the police. 20 minutes later, Officer Martinez arrived, a young cop who looked embarrassed to be there. Karen had transformed into the picture of a concerned citizen, explaining how this confused elderly gentleman had become increasingly hostile about following community rules. I tried to explain the situation, but how do you summarize 37 years of history in a few sentences? Officer Martinez was professional but clear, regardless of the merits. If the HOA claimed it was private property and I didn't have permission to be there, I needed to leave. As I packed up my tackle box, hands shaking with humiliation and rage, Karen delivered her final blow. Frank, I want you to know this gives me no pleasure, she said. Loud enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. But when people refuse to follow rules, when they become disruptive to our community's peace and property values, well, sometimes tough decisions have to be made. That afternoon, I received a certified letter. The HOA was filing for a restraining order to keep me away from Cedar Lake. But more than that, they were placing a lien on my property for accumulated violations and legal fees. The amount, $47,000. I was facing the loss of everything Margaret and I had built together, all because I wanted to fish in the same spot where I'd been fishing for decades. But as I sat in my kitchen that evening, staring at those legal documents, something Karen said kept echoing in my mind. Emergency board session. In 37 years of HOA meetings, we never had a single emergency session. What emergency could possibly justify privatizing our community lake? And why hadn't any of the other longtime residents heard about this vote? I picked up my phone and called my neighbor, Bill Henderson, who'd lived here almost as long as I had. Bill, did you know about any HOA vote regarding Cedar Lake? There was a long pause. Frank, what are you talking about? What vote? Sleep became a stranger after that phone call with Bill. I spent the next 3 days calling every longtime resident I could think of. The Johnsons, the Patels, Mrs. Chen, the Rodriguez family. The response was always the same: confusion, concern, and most importantly, complete ignorance about any vote to privatize Cedar Lake. By Thursday morning, I was standing in the office of Patricia Vance, an attorney who'd handled Margaret's estate 2 years earlier. Patricia had silver hair and steel eyes, the kind of liar who could probably win an argument with a judge in her sleep. Frank, let me make sure I understand this correctly, she said, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed the HOA documents. They're claiming emergency powers to convert common area property into private property without community notification or a general membership vote. That's exactly what happened. And now they want $47,000 from me. Patricia's eyebrows shot up. For fishing violations. According to this itemized list, I've been trespassing for 6 months at $500 per incident, plus administrative fees, plus legal consultation fees, plus something called community disruption penalties. She leaned back in her chair, and I saw something I hadn't expected. She was trying not to smile. Frank, I've been practicing horror law for 23 years. What you're describing isn't just irregular. It's potentially criminal. HOA letters can't simply declare common areas private property without following very specific legal procedures. And they certainly can't impose retroactive fines for activities that were illegal when you performed them. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. So you'll take the case? Oh, I'll take it. But Frank, I think we need to dig deeper here. This isn't just about fishing rights. Something else is going on. Patricia was right. But I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole would go. Our investigation started with public records. Patricia sent her paralegal, a sharp young woman named Amy, to the county courthouse while we reviewed the HOA's governing documents. What we found made my stomach turn. The original 1985 development agreement clearly designated Cedar Lake as perpetual common area for the exclusive use and enjoyment of Willow Creek Estates residents. There was no provision for converting it to private property. Ever, the lake wasn't just part of our community. It was protected by covenant. But the real bombshell came from Amy's courthouse visit. You need to see this, she said, spreading documents across Patricia's conference table. I pulled the recent property records for the entire development. Look at this deed transfer from 3 weeks ago. My eyes scanned the legal language until I found the property description. Cedar Lake and the surrounding 3 acres had been transferred to Whitfield Development LLC. Whitfield, I whispered, as in Karen Whitfield. It gets worse, Amy continued. I ran a business search. Whitfield Development LLC was incorporated 6 months ago. The registered agent is Karen's husband, Michael Whitfield. And look at this. She showed me another document, a preliminary development proposal filed with the County Planning Commission. Whitfield Development was requesting approval to build luxury condominiums on the Cedar Lake property. The projected value of the development to $0.3 million. She stole our lake, I said, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. She actually stole our lake. Patricia was furiously taking notes. Frank, this is fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy. We're not just fighting HOA overreach anymore. This is criminal. But proving it would be another challenge entirely. We needed evidence of the conspiracy, documentation of the illegal transfer, and proof that the emergency vote was fabricated. That's when I remembered something. The HOA meetings were supposed to be recorded. It was a rule implemented years ago to ensure transparency. If there really had been an emergency session, there should be a recording. Getting that recording, however, proved nearly impossible. Karen's assistant, a nervous woman named Debbie, claimed the recording equipment had malfunctioned during the emergency session. No recording existed. I was beginning to lose hope when fate intervened in the form of my neighbor's teenage daughter. Sophie Chen was 17, tech-savvy, and had been spending money by house-sitting for neighbors. When they traveled 3 weeks earlier, she'd been watching Karen's house while the Whitfields were supposedly out of town. Mr. Morrison, she said when I bumped into her at the mailbox. My mom said you're having trouble with Ms. Whitfield about the lake. That's putting it mildly, Sophie. She glanced around nervously. This might sound weird, but when I was house-sitting, I heard voices in Ms. Whitfield's home office, like a meeting or something. I thought they were supposed to be out of town, so I got scared and hid in the guest bathroom. But I could hear everything. My heart started racing. What did you hear? Ms. Whitfield was talking to some men about votes and property transfers and lake access. She kept saying things like once the old man is out of the picture and the development permits are already in process. Mr. Morrison, I think she was planning something bad. Sophie, would you be willing to tell my attorney what you heard? She nodded quickly. There's more. I recorded some of it on my phone. I was scared, and I thought maybe I should have evidence in case something happened to me. I know I shouldn't have. But, Sophie, you may have just saved my home. The recording was devastating. We could clearly hear Karen's voice discussing the fabricated emergency vote, coordinating with her husband about the property transfer timeline, and most damning of all, planning to escalate pressure on Morrison until he's forced to sell. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. During the recording, she mentioned the exact date and time of the fraudulent HOA board meeting, a meeting that, according to our investigation, several board members weren't even aware had taken place. Patricia listened to the recording 3 times, her expression growing more serious with each playback. Frank, this isn't just fraud anymore. This is racketeering, conspiracy, theft of community assets. Karen Whitfield didn't just violate HOA rules. She committed multiple felonies. So what happens now? Patricia smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from her since this nightmare began. Now we take her to court. And Frank, we're not just getting your fishing rights back. We're going to make sure Karen Whitfield never victimizes another community again. As I left Patricia's office that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine hope. But I also felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was war. And tomorrow, the war would begin in earnest. Judge Helen Rodriguez's courtroom felt like a cathedral of justice as I walked in that Monday morning, my hands shaking slightly as I carried my folder of evidence. 3 months of preparation had led to this moment, and the packed gallery behind me told me this case had become bigger than just one man's fishing rights. Patricia had warned me it would be intense. Frank, Karen's legal team isn't going to roll over. They're going to attack your credibility, your memory, even your mental competency. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and trust the evidence. As Karen entered the courtroom, I barely recognized the woman who'd had me arrested. Gone was the casual neighborhood tyrant in yoga pants and designer sunglasses. This version wore a conservative navy suit, pearl earrings, and an expression of wounded innocence that would have been convincing if I didn't know better. Her attorney, Richard Blackwood, looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate law firm catalog. Expensive suit, silver hair, and the kind of confidence that came from billing $800 an hour as he arranged his papers. I couldn't help but wonder how Karen was affording such high-end representation for what should have been a simple HOA dispute. Your Honor, Blackwood began during opening statements. This case represents a disturbing trend of disgruntled residents using frivolous litigation to overturn legitimate community governance. Mrs. Whitfield, as the duly elected HOA president, followed all proper procedures to protect property values and community standards. Mr. Morrison's refusal to follow rules has escalated into harassment and false accusations. Patricia stood for our opening, and I felt a surge of pride watching her command the room. Your Honor, what we'll prove today is that this isn't about HOA governance at all. This is about theft, fraud, and the systematic victimization of an entire community for personal gain. The evidence will show that Mrs. Whitfield orchestrated an elaborate scheme to steal community property worth over $2 million, using fabricated emergency powers and fraudulent documentation. The first witness was Bill Henderson, my longtime neighbor. Under Patricia's questioning, he testified about the complete lack of community notice regarding any vote about Cedar Lake. In 42 years living in Willow Creek, we've never had an emergency HOA session, Bill said, his voice steady. Every vote affecting common areas requires 30 days written notice to all residents. I never received any such notice. Blackwood's cross-examination was aggressive. Mr. Henderson, isn't it true you've been cited multiple times for HOA violations? Isn't this testimony motivated by personal animosity toward Mrs. Whitfield, sir? I was cited for leaving my garbage cans out past 7 a.m. That hardly makes me a criminal, the courtroom chuckled, and I saw Judge Rodriguez suppress a smile. Next came Amy, Patricia's paralegal, who methodically presented the public records evidence. The timeline was devastating. Incorporation of Whitfield Development LLC, the suspicious property transfer, and the development application filed just days after my arrest. The property transfer occurred exactly 48 hours after the alleged emergency vote, Amy testified. The development application was submitted before the transfer was even recorded, suggesting advance knowledge of the outcome. Blackwood objected repeatedly, claiming speculation and lack of foundation. But the timeline spoke for itself. Then Patricia called Sophie Chen. Sophie was nervous, but determined as she took the stand. Her testimony about overhearing the planning meeting was compelling. But when Patricia asked to play the recording, the courtroom went dead silent. Karen's voice filled the room. Once the old man is out of the picture and we've secured the lake PR property, the development permits are already in process. Michaels LLC will handle the construction contracts, and we'll split the profits with our board allies. I watched Karen's face drain of color as her own words echoed through the courtroom. Blackwood was frantically scribbling notes, no doubt, trying to figure out how to explain away what sounded like a confession. The recording continued. The emergency vote documentation is already prepared. We'll backdate everything and claim the meeting happened last Tuesday. Henderson and the other old-timers will never figure it out. Judge Rodriguez leaned forward. Is there more? Patricia nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The most damning portion, Karen's voice. Morrison's rest was perfect theater. Now we can claim community safety concerns and expedite the restraining order. Once he's legally barred from the property, the transfer becomes fait accompli. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Rodriguez gavelled for order. But I could see she was struggling to maintain her judicial composure when Blackwood cross-examined Sophie. His desperation was palpable. Miss Chen, isn't it true you were trespassing when you allegedly made this recording? And isn't this recording illegal under state wiretapping laws? Patricia objected. Your Honor, the recording was made by someone lawfully present in the property, overhearing a conversation in a semi-public space. There's no wiretapping violation. Overruled. The witness may answer. Sophie's voice was stronger now. I was house sitting with permission. I recorded because I was scared for my safety and wanted evidence in case something happened to me. Finally, Patricia called me to the stand. As I walked past Karen's table, she wouldn't meet my eyes. Patricia walked me through my 37 years in Willow Creek, my wife's death, the importance of fishing as my grief outlet, and the escalating harassment that followed Karen's rival, Mr. Morrison. Why did you refuse to pay the fishing permit fee? Because it wasn't legal. Cedar Lake has been community property since 1985. I helped organize fishing tournaments there for decades. Karen had no right to charge fees for our own lake. When Blackwood stood for cross-examination, I braced myself. Mr. Morrison, isn't it true you have a history of conflicts with neighbors, that you've been described as argumentative and hostile, sir? The only conflict I've had in this neighborhood is with Mrs. Whitfield. And only after she started trying to steal community property. Isn't it true you've been struggling with depression and isolation since your wife's death? That this lawsuit is really about your inability to accept change? The question hit hard. But Patricia's preparation held me steady. My wife's death was devastating. Fishing helped me heal. Mrs. Whitfield tried to take away the one thing keeping me connected to my community and my memories. But this lawsuit isn't about grief, sir. It's about preventing theft. Blackwood pressed on. You keep claiming theft. But isn't it true that HOA boards have the authority to make decisions about common areas? Not when those decisions violate the original covenants, state law, and basic ethics. And certainly not when board members personally profit from those decisions. As Blackwood returned to his table, I caught sight of Karen whispering urgently in his ear. Whatever she was saying. It looked like panic. But then came the moment that changed everything, Your Honor. Blackwood said, standing again. I'd like to call a surprise witness, Mrs. Debbie Morris, HOA secretary. Has new information relevant to this case. Patricia objected, but Judge Rodriguez allowed it. As Debbie took the stand, looking terrified, I had no idea we were about to learn the truth behind Karen's entire operation. Mrs. Morris. Blackwood said, please tell the court about the emergency HOA meeting in question. Debbie's voice was barely audible. There was no emergency meeting. The courtroom went silent. Even Blackwood looked stunned. Judge Rodriguez leaned forward. I'm sorry, what did you say? There was no meeting. Karen told me to create fake minutes and backdate them. She said it was just paperwork correction. But what? Mrs. Morris. Debbie looked directly at Karen, tears streaming down her face. But then I found out about the development deal. Karen promised me $20,000 to keep quiet. But I can't be part of this anymore. The courtroom erupted as Debbie's testimony shattered Karen's defense like glass. Judge Rodriguez gavelled for order, but nothing could contain the shock rippling through the gallery. Karen's own secretary had just confessed to falsifying official HOA documents under direct orders. Patricia was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, I move for an immediate directed verdict on all counts. Mrs. Morris has just admitted to participating in document fraud under Mrs. Whitfield's direction. Blackwood looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Your Honor, my client, we need time to confer, Mr. Blackwood, Judge Rodriguez said sharply. Your surprise witness just testified that your client suborned perjury and document fraud. I suggest you confer very quickly. As the courtroom buzzed with conversation during the brief recess, I watched Karen's world collapse. Her husband Michael had gone pale, frantically texting on his phone. The HOA board members who'd supported her were edging away like she had a contagious disease. Even Blackwood was keeping his distance, clearly calculating how to minimize his own professional exposure. But Patricia pulled me aside with an expression I couldn't read. Frank, there's something else. Amy's been digging deeper into the financial records. Well, we've been in court. What we found, it's bigger than we thought. She handed me a manila folder. Inside were bank statements, wire transfer records, and corporate filings that made my head spin. This wasn't just about Cedar Lake. Patricia explained, look at these payments over the last 2 years. Whitfield Development has been paying kickbacks to multiple HOA board members across 3 different communities. This was a systematic operation. What are you saying? I'm saying Karen wasn't just stealing from us. She's been running a multi-community scam, using HOA positions to identify and acquire valuable common area properties. The lake was just one. piece of a much larger puzzle. When court reconvened, Judge Rodriguez wasted no time. After considering Mrs. Morris's testimony and reviewing the evidence presented, this court finds the defendant's actions constitute fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of community assets, and conspiracy. Mrs. Whitfield, you will immediately cease all claims against Mr. Morrison's property and pay restitution in the amount of $2.3 million to the Willow Creek Estates HOA for the fair mark at value of the stolen property. Karen finally looked up, her face a mask of disbelief. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. The evidence suggests a pattern of racketeering that extends far beyond this community. Blackwood stood shakily. Your Honor, we respectfully request, Mr. Blackwood. Your client just lost a $2.3 million judgment. I suggest you focus on preparing for the criminal charges that are likely coming. As the gavel fell, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Margaret died. Pure, overwhelming relief. Not just because I'd won, but because justice had actually prevailed. But the real surprise came as we were leaving the courthouse. Detective Sarah Williams approached our group in the hallway. Mr. Morrison, Ms. Vance, I'm with the County Financial Crimes Unit. We've been investigating Mrs. Whitfield for 6 months. Patricia and I exchanged glances. You have. Her operation was much larger than you realized. We believe she's stolen nearly $8 million in community assets across 7 different HOA letters. Your case provided the final evidence we needed. My head was spinning. $8 million. The Cedar Lake theft was actually small compared to some others. In Riverside Manor, she convinced the HOA to lease their community center to her company, then sold it to developers in Pine Ridge. She had the board vote to sell their playground to fund infrastructure improvements that never happened. How many families were affected? Over 1,500 households, Mr. Morrison. But here's the beautiful part. Your refusal to back down, your insistence on fishing in that lake, exposed the entire network. Every family she victimized is going to get justice because you wouldn't give up your fishing spot. 3 weeks later, I was back at Cedar Lake with my rod and tackle box. The morning sun painted the water gold, and for the first time in months, I felt genuine peace. The lake was ours again, permanently protected by a court order that made it legally impossible for any future HOA to privatize it. Sophie Chen joined me, bringing coffee and donuts from the local bakery. Mr. Morrison, have you seen the news? She showed me her phone. The headline read, HOA fraud ring busted. 7 communities recover stolen assets worth $8.2 million. Below it, a smaller headline, Fishing Grandpa's legal victory exposes multi-state scam. They're calling you a hero, Sophie said, grinning. I'm not a hero, Sophie. I just wanted to fish. Sometimes that's enough. As I cast my line into the calm water, I thought about Margaret. She would have loved this story. The idea that her stubborn husband's refusal to be bullied had protected hundreds of families from financial devastation. Karen Whitfield was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The other HOA board members received various sentences ranging from probation to 5 years. Debbie Morris, in exchange for her cooperation, received community service and helped establish a victim compensation fund. But the real victory wasn't the money or the sentences. It was the law that passed 6 months later, the Morrison Act, requiring all HOA property transfers to have independent legal review and community approval. No HOA president would ever again have the power to steal community assets with fabricated emergency votes. Sometimes I still see news stories about HOA abuses, corporate fraud, or powerful people victimizing their communities. And I think about that morning when Karen called the cops on an old man with a fishing rod. She thought she was removing an obstacle to her theft. Instead, she'd just awakened the one person stubborn enough to bring down her entire empire. The fish are still biting at Cedar Lake, and I'm still here every morning, casting my line and keeping watch, because sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to give up the things you love. What horror stories have you experienced? Share them in the comments below, and remember, never let anyone steal what rightfully belongs to your community. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to fight back.